Good afternoon and thank you for being with us today. Let me say a few words about our next speaker, Dr. Isuru Koswatte. Dr. Isuru is an adjunct senior research fellow at NSBM Green University. He has completed his PhD at the University of Manchester as the youngest member of his PhD batch. He also was part of the non-IB research community. Dr. Isuru has an MSc in International Business from the University of Manchester with a first class honors. He also has his bachelor degree in business and management from the University of Birmingham, UK. He is currently served as a lecturer at the School of Business and Creative Industry at the University of West Scotland. Dr. Isuru Koswatte joining us today to share his experience with us on the NVivo qualitative research software. Dr. Isuru, welcome to the monthly meeting of the month of May. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much for that introduction, very elaborate introduction. And again, I'm very happy to see what the Young Researchers Club has been doing. Obviously, I've been closely following and working quite closely with Vipul and Shahara and the rest of them. And obviously, want to thank Ms. Shahani also for inviting me and for giving me this opportunity. And yeah, so before I start, I mean, yes, I'll be obviously giving you a bit of an overview. So what I decided today is obviously, since this is not an actual, I would say, workshop, and it's still not a presentation, I'll try to do my best to give you an introduction. And just picking on what Mr. Kasun mentioned, I think that was very important. I think especially in Sri Lanka, we have a tendency, I mean, there's nothing wrong with it, where we are quite heavily invested when it comes to quantitative research, which is brilliant. I mean, obviously that helps you to start thinking in a very critical way from the beginning. However, especially in the area where we are, which is in business and any other sort of social sciences areas, there is a lot of scope, especially if you know, because now you work with Plymouth and obviously you have an exposure, especially in the European region, where qualitative research is very strong. I mean, you get a lot of academics in the business field who are very strong qualitative researchers, and there is still this massive, I would say, debate as to whether you are qualitative or quantitative. But going forward, I think you have to be an all-round academic. That's the expectation, where you are sound in both departments. And again, you can be someone like a mixed method researcher, where I can call myself that the case. But then I think having that basic understanding of what qualitative research is, what kind of tools that you can use, will be really helpful in terms of you going forward. So without taking further time, I will start sharing my presentation with you all. Right, I hope you can see the screen.
Yes, Dr. Isuru, we can see.
Fantastic. So the basic plan for today is that I hope Vipul has been kind to you to inform that there is a license that is floating around. Again, please be kind enough to obviously use it at any time, but please don't distribute it mass scale, because I might get into trouble for that. But what I thought was, obviously with the software that we're talking today, you will have to start practicing on your own. I mean, in this time duration, I know that I'm keeping a track on my time. There is so much that we can do, but I'm more than happy to obviously address any of the questions, any of the problems that you might have going forward. So what we'll do is we'll run through the slides, but at the very end, I will probably just give you a very brief overview of how the software looks. And the other problem I have is, obviously, I'm using a Mac computer, and I was telling Vipul that the interface is quite different on Windows as far as I know. So that's the other reason why you might find it a little weird if I was to obviously run the entire session on my computer. So those are things to just keep in mind. And yes, let's kick this off. Right. So again, I think Kaushadi probably gave you an introduction already in terms of qualitative data. I think one of the most interesting areas, especially in the field that we are in, is to understand that people's feelings, people's ideas, people's sort of thought processes are quite diverse, and it's very difficult for each and every one of you to really capture that through sort of quantitative or numerical way. So how do we really encapsulate these ideas is where the qualitative research really steps in to the equation. And again, We talk about non-numeric examinations, interpretations. People have different ways in which they talk about certain things, the views and opinions people take. Now, again, not to be too controversial, I know in Sri Lanka these days there are a few hotly debated topics surrounding, let's say, something to do with religion or culture. So different people could interpret the situations in different ways. And again, the primary objective with qualitative analysis, whether it is using NVivo or any other method to go forward, is that we are basically trying to understand whether there is a certain pattern or a theme that is emerging. That is the basic idea that we want to do. And through this sort of pattern emergence, or through these themes that are being addressed, we are basically trying to add value to theory and sort of build on this understanding in a better way. So that is basically what the sort of process really captures through this. And again, sort of qualitative data analysis softwares have been there. I think the growth of the softwares have been quite strong, I would say, in the past 5 to 6 years, where things have really improved. And again, one of the biggest problems we had with qualitative data is the sheer amount of information. I mean, if you look at something like a survey or something in a quantitative way, or you do an SPSS, you have everything stored. It's just about playing around in your devices and you are good to go. But again, with qualitative information, whether it is to do interviews, to speak to people, observations, all that is quite a tedious job. I think anyone who has done interviews would understand. I can remember during my PhD, I had to do close to, I think 40 to 50 interviews. Trust me, it was a nightmare. It is very difficult. And again, after all that is done, sort of going about with the process does really take time. So basically, one of the important things that you need to understand, especially as quantitative researchers who are coming into this, I will harp on this in the next few slides as well. This is something that helps you to really organize, analyze, and keep insights. Organize is the key word here. I will tell you why this is very important. So organizing and retrieving information is the most important thing that you need to keep in your mind. And again, if you look at the different sort of types of software that is available, there are quite a lot of softwares available, things like MaxQDA, DDoS, but the most commonly used, or the most, I would say, comprehensive software that we can really use is what we call NVivo. Unfortunately, NVivo, in terms of updates, it has been a bit tricky. Now I think all of you people, if I'm not mistaken, people might have been able to get the software installed in their computers without no issue. But the main thing I wanted to stress on this is not the latest one. So latest is, I think, 13 or 14. For some reason, they don't really update the platform as much, but 12 is more than sufficient. But I know in 14, there are a few more advanced steps that are available. So hopefully, once that comes through, we might be able to sort of go ahead with that. Other than that, if you're trying to purchase it, it's very expensive. I think it cost around £600 for a year or something, which is absurd. I don't know why they're charging so much. But yeah, so those are basic things to know about the software in that sense. It's quite stable. It's very easy to use. I think it's self-explanatory. You don't have to really go through a specialized training process or anything. So that is basically about the software in itself. Now, the most important thing with qualitative data analysis is for you to understand, as I said at the very beginning, it's very difficult to capture people's ideas, feelings, thoughts, and sort of make sense out of it. I mean, qualitative data analysis softwares rather helps you in the process, but please remember, this is not a substitute, or this is not equivalent to your SPSS or any other sort of, whether it is to do with PLS, structure equation modeling. It's nothing like that. Remember, it does not do the analysis for you. I think that is the most important thing that you need to understand. When it comes to qualitative data analysis softwares, what it basically does is it helps you to really keep all this information stored and you could access them very easily. I think that's the basic idea you need to understand. Okay, so through giving you easy access, what does that mean? It helps the sort of analysis process easier. You don't have to sort of scuff through different, I don't know, piles and heaps of interviews that you've done. You don't have to look at different chapters or pages. So everything is stored for you in a very safe way. So you can almost consider this to be more like a virtual diary or basically something of that sort. So that's the most important thing that you need to keep in your mind when it comes to most of these QDA software. So this is for now. So hopefully this situation might improve in the next couple of years. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. Hopefully once QDA software has improved further, because again, as I said, the importance or the significance of qualitative research has really risen in the past couple of years. As I said, especially in the Asian region, South Asia, also even in India, there's a big chit chat about bringing in qualitative research into the equation, especially from a business side of things. So hopefully with all this kind of new influx of interest, I think there might be a potential that some of these QDA software such as NVivo might be able to analyze the data for you going forward as well. But for now, just keep in mind, this is more of a place for you to keep your data stored and retrieve and help you throughout the process of the data analysis. Right, guys, again, I don't want to run this as a direct presentation, so I don't know whether we can still do it, but if you have any questions during whatever I'm saying, Vipul, I don't know if it's possible, please feel free to share around the mic. If people have any questions, anything that they want to clarify, they could still ask during this session. So I'm pretty flexible with that as well.
Yeah, sure, Dr. Isuru. Yeah.
Okay, fabulous. Okay, so again, NVivo basically is a very simple platform, as I said. So this is how kind of it looks like. I will obviously demonstrate it as we go forward. And you can keep everything stored and retrieve very easily. And as I said, it is something that we usually use from the very beginning of the process. So for example, if you are doing, let's say, a couple of interviews, you would want to start the process or start this process of gathering information and putting it into NVivo from the very beginning. Okay. Now, if anyone has done qualitative research, you might understand where I'm coming from. Now, for example, if you were to go and do some interviews, okay, I will use some examples which are the most frequent ones students as well as academics will also be using. So if you are doing interviews, one of the things that you might know is when you do interviews, it's not simply about asking the questions, whether it's a semi-structured interview or whether it is sort of a deep discussion. It's not simply about asking the questions that are present and just expecting people to answer. There is much more to it. Again, this is a human interaction. You are speaking to people, you are looking at their body language. For example, a basic example is, okay, if I'm talking in a certain way, and if I'm going to cross my arms, if I'm fidgeting, if I'm looking elsewhere, probably that might, I mean, you don't have to be a body language expert, but probably that might mean that somebody is feeling uncomfortable, somebody is feeling unease, they are not very comfortable, they feel quite, awkward, I would say, during the interview. So all these little things that you are not really covering through the questions, you need to keep that in mind. So all that information, the little body language movements or the little comments that you want to make, you will also include it in your interview guideline. Okay. So why do I say that you need to start the process of putting all this information at the very beginning into NVivo? Because you might forget. Now, as I said, if you're doing 40 interviews, hypothetically, you are not going to do 40 interviews in 1 week. Okay. It might easily take, I don't know, 3 to 4 months, even on a very perfect kind of setup. So whatever happened at the very beginning of your sessions or whatever happened during the very first presentation or the interview, all those little pointers that you made, you might forget at the very end. Okay, so that's why you need to, for example, if you do a couple of interviews at the very beginning of your data collection process, please put that into NVivo. All those little sort of comments, you can still put those into NVivo as well, and you have them stored from the beginning. So the process is quite continuous, I would say, whereas I would say in quantitative, it's completely different, where obviously you would do your survey, you would gather your information, and at the very end, you will obviously start with the SPSS process. So that's another thing to remember. So it's a process that you obviously go through as we collect the information. And the good thing, although this might sound time consuming at the very beginning, the positive side of this is by the end of the interviews, let's say by the end of 30 or the 40 interviews, you have not only completed your data collection, but you've also managed to put all the essential information onto NVivo as well throughout the process. So those are some of the advantages that you have with some of the qualitative softwares. Otherwise, I can assure you it can be a nightmare to have piles of comments and sort of these documents written everywhere about different sort of interviews, and it's just a little messy as we go along. So those are a few things that we can keep in our mind as we go along. So as I said in the last slide, so NVivo is more of an electronic project. So if anyone has done project management or something, you might get a feel for it. So basically think of this as your storeroom, electronic storeroom, where you can have any type of information, again, from videos to images, textual data. I think these are the most important ones for all of us to understand: the textual information, the sort of interview transcripts, articles, and any other secondary information. Also, you can have audio files as well, data sets, website, social media, bibliographic information. So all the information that is usually captured through sort of qualitative research, you can store this on NVivo. But again, I think the most important thing for all of you is to understand what are the most possible scenarios, which would be, I assume, you will be using your interviews in this sort of process as we go along. Right. So again, one of the essentials that we need to also think about is, I think we have to be very clear in terms of what we want to do. I think this comes back to that question or the comment that I made at the very beginning. You have to be very sure in terms of what are you trying to do. Now, for example, using NVivo in a certain project would be ideal if you are going to do some interviews in your study. Or for example, one of the most suitable scenarios would be that if you are having sort of a case study approach, let's say for some reason you are interested, hypothetically, let's assume you are interested in studying about the tea industry of Sri Lanka, and you want to take obviously Dilma as an example or as the case study. Now that will be an ideal scenario for you to use something like NVivo, because you are now trying to capture sort of an overall picture about what is happening with Dilma. So I would assume you would do a few interviews with some of the management. You might then also use that information coupled with some of the newspaper articles. You might use things like websites, social media, etc. So you are basically trying to capture a comprehensive picture of what Dilma does in different sort of formats. So that would be an ideal scenario where you are trying to gather information, put it into NVivo. So I think this is what you need to be very clear from the beginning. What are you trying to do with the project? What are your ambitions? What are your goals with the project? And then you start sort of gathering the information. And again, so from that point onwards, after you are clear about what kind of data that you're using, then you need to start thinking about what is your unit of analysis. Okay, now, again, as I said, qualitative data, we are talking about thoughts, processes, and different things. So are you going to capture this through individual level, whether it is something directly relevant to the people? Now, for example, if you want to, again, hypothetically, if you're trying to understand what makes people resilient in an organization, what makes people empowered in an organization, so you are trying to look at this from an individual people level. Or are you trying to capture an organization level study? For example, how organizational culture allows Sri Lankan companies to survive during crisis, for example. Or is it something to do with location? Again, context specific. Are we looking at something unique to Sri Lanka? Are we looking at how, again, taking controversial topics, how much, how is religious sensitivity impacting day-to-day life in Sri Lanka, for example, taking on something that is happening right now in the country. So you have to be very clear in terms of what level or what unit of analysis you are doing as well. And again, from that point onwards, you can start thinking about, okay, what is your demographic? What are the kinds of areas, what kind of organizations you want to study? So then the process usually goes back to our usual research method process. So those are things I think you have to be quite clear at the very beginning, rather than straight away jumping on to something like NVivo and going forward and then realizing, okay, hold on a second, what are we really doing here? Okay, so I think having that clarity of thought at the very beginning would be quite helpful, most of you at this level. So again, as I said, NVivo, you could use it in so many different ways. Again, things like grounded theory. Again, I've highlighted two of the most important ones. Again, case studies, as I explained, and again, things like thematic analysis or template analysis. Again, I'm not sure whether most of you have any experience with thematic analysis. Again, it's a qualitative sort of technique where we are basically, I would say, trying to come up with certain themes. We might have certain themes that we think that are relevant for a certain case. Now, for example, I'll take an easy example. What do we take? Let's take again the issue of religion. I don't know why, but I find it quite fascinating. Okay, let's say for some reason, we know that, okay, in Sri Lanka, religious sensitivity is a hotly debated topic. So some of the themes that we might have at the very beginning that we think are relevant is, okay, social media posts that are criticizing religious leaders. We might think that might be an important criteria as to why people get really mad at some of these things. Or we might say the role of politicians. Okay, so these are some of the things that we might identify at the very beginning of our study. Before we even jump into the data, we might think, okay, these are the kind of themes that are going to be relevant in our study. Okay, and we start off the study with that process. But by the time we go ahead with the study, by the time we have done our analysis, which is what we call the thematic analysis, we might find, wait on, yes, there were some things, but there's a new theme that is emerging. What is the new theme? That I don't know, there is a foreign power that is putting their invisible hand into this process and sort of creating a lot of controversy inside the country. So that was something that was not seen at the very beginning. So can you see? So we are, so that's what we call a thematic sort of basic analysis, where we have some themes identified, and then throughout the process of the analysis, we might come out with something new. Again, coming out with something new, that is where NVivo really helps, guys. Okay, so I will explain this process very clearly as I show around the process. So again, there are other things like ethnography, where we obviously spend time on different studies for a long time and go ahead. So there are different kinds of ways in which you can use NVivo, but I think the most practical or the most feasible or the most or the highest probability of you using NVivo would be on a case study or on a thematic analysis kind of a system as we go along. Guys, are we clear so far? Any questions from anyone? Any doubts so far? I just want a heads up before I head forward. Are we clear? Sorry, I had to get somebody to stand up and come here. Thank you, Dr. Isuru. Yeah, I think you can speak to the mic a little louder. Can you hear me, Dr. Isuru? Yes, can hear you. Thank you so much, sir, for the presentation. Yeah, we've got a really tiny screen on my thing with the audience. So unfortunately, I can't really see your reaction so far because I've got the presentation on. So apologies for that. I don't think so.
So there's no questions at the moment.
No questions. Fantastic. Okay. Just wanted a heads up. Perfect. So I assume most of you are understanding what I'm saying, or on another note, you are still clueless and you are being very nice to me and pretending that you understand. So I would assume it's the former. Right. Okay, so let's look at a few basics again. This is how NVivo looks like when you open it, and I would like to, obviously, for you to look at um, obviously the left-hand side of the screen here. Let me try to see if I can get the. Okay, why is the pointer? Right. Okay, so I hope you can see the pointer here. Right. So this is where basically all of our information. Sorry, is the screen gone out now for some reason? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. So this is where you would be looking at on NVivo. Basically, you have your files, the different classifications, and there are a few other things that you basically need to understand. And then all of that information that you have will come here. Okay. Again, the base, another important thing for you to understand, guys, is also that, okay, I'll show this from the next one. Okay. So now when it comes to files, so now files basically means what we discussed before. Remember, I said how this is a digital storeroom. That's the essence here. Okay, so on files, you are going to have, now this is from the sample file. So these are things that people have put forward. So basically, let's assume you do some interviews. So once you do interviews, I think the first step that you need to do is to transcribe interviews. Okay, I hope you know what that process is. Basically, we are trying to get the interview into a Word document. Word to word, we are trying to get it into a Word document. Why? That is how we are going to then start the analyzing process. So once you do interviews, you would then transcribe the interviews. Again, as I said, the best scenario or the ideal scenario in which, or the best advice I can give you to do this analysis is, let's say you're doing 30 interviews. Okay, what you would do is, let's say you've got a couple of interviews planned for, I don't know, let's say 5 interviews planned for a week. Okay, so what you would do is you do your 5 interviews. Okay, ideally you would transcribe or put them into a Word document in that week in itself. Again, why do I say that? Because every single interview you are going to capture things outside the questions that you're asking, body language, little notes that you're making, the little movements people had, whether they were smiling, whether they were crying, whether they were laughing, whatever happened in the interview, you are going to capture in your notes or whatever system that you did. So that's why I said, once you do 5 interviews for a week, you would then transcribe the interviews and then put them into the system, and you keep on going with the process. So this is where then you would have your interviews that you've done. So ideally what happens is, basically you have the Word files, and then from here you just basically say import, and straight away you can import them onto NVivo. So that's your interviews. And again, other information, you can still store them if you want to put some literature into this. As I said, this will be only useful in scenarios where you are using your interview data, supplementing that with some other information to create maybe something like a case study. But if you're simply doing interviews, you would only have interviews. I will show a file that I worked on. So what I thought was, I will show you the sample file from NVivo, which has all the information, which might be a little confusing in certain situations. I will show that just to give you an example, but I will show you a file that I've actually worked on during my PhD, so that you will have a better sense of how practically you will be using it. I hope you can see the difference. I know the most ideal scenario in every single use, it's good to see, but then you will not be using it in real life situation. So I will actually show you the file I have been working on, so it makes more sense for you, because that will be the way in which you will be going forward with your analysis as well. Okay, so that's how basically it look like. So you have the literature, you can have news articles. Now, for example, if you're doing a secondary data analysis on qualitative, you will have your news articles, you will have social media posts, blogs, whatever, all that information, all the good stuff will come here, guys. Okay, so that's how information is stored here. Right. And I think the most important thing when it comes to NVivo is that, again, start thinking about why we are doing this. Again, the fundamental question, why are we putting all this information into NVivo? The main reason why we are putting all this information into NVivo, guys, is so that we are able to store our information in a very clear way. Okay. Now, I want to ask a question from the audience before I go ahead. Okay, now look at this image. Okay, probably Vipul can be kind enough to maybe pass the mic around. So when you look at this image, guys, now, can somebody tell me? I'm sure someone has seen something similar to this somewhere. I know that these days we have mostly servers and things, but just imagine you have a scenario where you have files stored. What is the way in which do you think these files are put? Okay, if somebody comes in with a heap of files, just put it there. How do you think this storing process happens? Can somebody tell me? Is this done in a certain way?
Hi, maybe based on time periods or maybe a chronicle order or an alphabetical order maybe?
Brilliant, exactly. That's right. So what basically happens is whether it is to do it in a chronological order, whether it's based on the sort of time duration, whether it is based on some kind of subject field. Now, for example, if you go to a library, obviously books are stored according to, obviously they have their own what we call the QR systems. By the way, I have never understood this system libraries have, including NSBM. I mean, most libraries, they have their own system, which I never understand how they sort of start and end from storing, but never mind. So the way they store obviously changes based on their own things. But the most important thing you need to understand is that there is a process, there is a systematic way in which data is being stored. So that is exactly what we want to do with NVivo as well. As I said, remember, NVivo is a process in which we are storing information. Okay, and basically codes or nodes is a basic idea of how this information can be captured. So as I said, if you are doing a certain qualitative piece of research, if you're doing a qualitative research, you might have an idea of, okay, what the study is about. As I said, now, for example, if the study is about religious sensitivity of Sri Lankan consumers, for example, okay, so that's your, let's say, basic topic, and you might have a few categories under that you're exploring. For example, whether people are religious, whether people follow some of these pages on social media. So whatever it is, you have certain themes or certain idea. You have a basic idea of how your overall topic can be really captured into a few themes. So that's what basically nodes would do on NVivo. Nodes is basically a collection of references that are kind of falling into a specific theme, or it can be a relationship. And then based on that, you can sort of code them. Okay, ideally, for example, let's say you have, now if you look at this example here, now this was a study that I did during my PhD. We were looking at something to do with resilience of firms. I hope you know what resilience means. It's about how firms are able to survive during crisis, such as the pandemic that we are just finishing, or with its economic crisis. What are the qualities of firms that helps them to survive? So things like, so these are some of the themes that I identified before I went into the analysis, guys. Okay, so I looking at the literature, looking at previous studies, I realized, okay, if a business, if a company needs to be resilient, they have to be adapt well. Okay, they have to be flexible, they have to be robust. So these were some categories that I identified at the very beginning, and then I captured them into a few sub themes also. For example, adaptation could mean you are strong in your mind, which is the psychological side of things. For example, flexibility means that you are having flexible workforce, which is flexible HR. You are able to fight through problems, find solutions, which is constraint bypassing. So like that, you can really capture different sub themes at the very initial stage. So that is what we are doing through codes. Okay, so ideally what happens is, remember, you have a study that you're doing, a qualitative piece of work, whether it's to do with exploring people's motivations, people's thoughts, whatever it is. You have a study that you're doing. you have some literature that you have analyzed, you have a basic idea of, okay, this is what I want to do. And that basic idea, those basic categories that you've identified from literature is what you are going to put under these nodes. Okay, so you develop this at the very beginning of the study. Okay, and then you start looking at your interview files. I hope that is clear. Okay, so that is a basic way in which you would start with the codes. And then you also have something called cases here. That is also somewhat useful, but we don't usually use it much. So cases is basically the unit of observation. Now, for example, this is more useful, as I said, if you are trying to focus on a case study approach. For example, if there are a couple of people that you're interviewing that are very important, you can capture them into that. Now, for example, let's say I want to study about, let's say for some reason, I want to take, let's say somebody from Sri Lanka, let's say Dhammika Pereira, okay, a renowned businessman, the richest man in Sri Lanka. I don't know whether he's still the richest guy. Let's say, okay, for some reason, I want to study about Dhammika Pereira. So what do? Obviously, I start looking at his portfolio of companies. I would start looking at how Haley's is performing. I will start looking at how sort of valuable finance is doing, for example, and then I'll start looking at, okay, what kind of information I can find on social media. What can I find on, he has something called DP education on LinkedIn. So all that information you can start capturing and putting it under cases, because we are basically building a profile of Dhammika Pereira based on the data that we have. And also, if you are lucky enough, if you are going to interview him, or if you're going to interview his management, that will be also captured under this category. So basically, we are building, just think of it as a bit of a job for a CIA individual. You are case profiling. Okay, you are trying to profile an individual based on different types of information, and then you're trying to put them into cases as we go along. So these are a few things that you need to keep in your mind. And then there's also something called notes under. I think this is one of the most important things. Now, this is exactly from a file that I have used. Now, remember I said during interviews, how you need to capture information that is important, that is outside the questions. Okay. Now, I'll give you an example. When I was doing my PhD study, one of the areas in which I had to look at was understanding how much of freedom, how much of empowerment, I mean, basically, how people felt in their work environments, whether individuals were motivated, whether they had the confidence, whether they were given the confidence to go and perform the best way possible in their organizations. So I looked at this in the case of Sri Lankan apparel sector, so garments. So I worked with companies like MAS, Heller, Brandix, etc. So I won't name the company, but I went to one of these places, not in Columbus, somewhere remote, and we had a chat. I had a chat with an employee. Obviously, we had to do it in Sinhala because of the language barrier. And she started telling very inside information in terms of how, for example, how demotivated she was during the workplace, and sort of different things. So this was information captured outside, let's say, our usual interview protocol. And there was another instance where they were happy, whether they were actually sad on certain things. So those are things, guys, we are not really putting it under nodes. As I said before, it's not coming under this category, but more under what we call memos. So memos is a place where you could start putting in all this other information. As I said, when you are doing an interview, once you've done an interview, let's say how it happens is you go for an interview, you have your script, you interview the person, you write some notes down during the interview, all done. You come back home, you get onto NVivo, and then you start transcribing that interview, the voice recorded interview onto the system. And then you have your note sheet where you wrote down a few notes about people's body language, whether they were crossing their hands, whether they were laughing, whether they were smiling, whether they were sad, whatever, all those notes that you've written down, all that would come under the memo section. So that is very important for you to understand. And it also helps you with the theorizing process. Now, this is a bit of an advanced step, maybe relevant for some of our academics, because all these other ideas that we're capturing, for example, people's emotions and things might be useful for you to really dive into deep in terms of how they feel about a topic, how they, for example, as I said, if somebody is going to do a study about the religious sensitivity about Sri Lankan individuals these days, people will be very passionate. Sometimes people will get very aggressive. Sometimes people will not care. Sometimes people get angry. People get happy for some reason. So all that information can help you to sort of really get a thorough understanding of what's going on. Okay, so that's why I said it's notes for yourself. It helps you to sort of theorize, write up ideas about codes, start thinking about possible relationships as well, and go forward. So it really helps you with the thinking process when you are starting to write things starting to write things about different things. Now, if you can see this file, as I said, I was interviewing employees. I felt that at one point there was a fear of change. People were worried that, okay, if there's new technology coming to the organization, if there's new techniques coming to the organization, they were scared. Why? Because the number one reason why they were scared was not because they were not good in learning. They were worried about job security. So those were kind of things people don't tell you directly, but those are things that you can understand from the interview. So when you understand those things, you would then note them down. When you come back, when you come on to NVivo, you would put them into the memo section. So this will be a nice place to go and look at. Once you have a clear picture of the interviews, you can then see, okay, this is where this is going. Okay, I can clearly see maybe the senior officers, senior individuals in the organization are more profit motivated, but the employees, they are struggling. So it really helps you to really understand what's going on at a very deep level, which is exactly what is required with qualitative research. And then, yes, so those are some basics, guys. So those were four basic things that I wanted to highlight that are falling in this sort of extreme left side of the NVivo software tool. And again, then it's about you going out there and sort of starting the coding process. Now, I hope you know what coding is. So basically coding, unfortunately, it's not the IT. I mean, it's somewhat similar, but it's a qualitative technique. Basically what we do, we read something. Okay, it's something like paraphrasing. I hope you know what paraphrasing is. You read a page from the newspaper, or you read a page on Harvard Business Review, and you are basically trying to say, okay, what are they talking about? Okay, what are they trying to say? Okay, so that is basically what we are doing with what we call sort of applying the codes to data, or what we call coding. Okay, so identifying sort of chunks of text and then trying to see what that chunk of text is trying to say in a couple of words. Okay, and you keep on doing this process. Unfortunately, as I said, we don't have AI or anything embedded into NVivo, hopefully in the future. So this is something we'll be doing manually. Okay, so that means we are going through the interview transcript. Okay, we are reading things. Once we read that paragraph, can we capture that entire paragraph under one chunk, under one or couple of words? That is basically what we mean by coding. And this process can be overlapping also, because some ideas can be mixed with each other. That's no problem as we go along. So basically, how do you do it? Okay, so let's assume this is a piece of text that we have from our interviews. Okay, and then we are trying to code. Okay, now for example, in the first couple of lines, it's talking about a village. They're talking about youngsters in the village, so maybe something to do with age. So if that's relevant, we put that in that way. And maybe the next little bit is talking about residency. Okay, young people, again, something to do with them finding work easy, something similar. And then things on word of mouth, contrasting. So whatever it is, basically, we are trying to capture the ideas through our interviews. Okay, so this is something you can easily do on NVivo. You could highlight, you can put them into different nodes, and you can go forward. Right, so that is basically what I had on my slides. I hope we are clear so far. So what I will do is I will now go on to NVivo and give you a very short demonstration on how basically it looks like. And yeah, I will then welcome any questions that you will have, and we can take it from there. Yes, so let me now show you NVivo. Okay, let me first start with the sample project because it makes more sense, I think. Why is it not letting me screenshot? Right, guys, can you see NVivo now? I don't know. Yes, I think you can see, right? Okay.
Yes, sir, we can see.
Thank you. Right. Okay. So as I said, this is my computer, and this is how it looks on my computer. Again, it's not usually this dark, by the way. I use something on my computer, so that's why it is. So the interface might look different, but don't worry about those things too much. I want you to focus on the left side of things. Okay, so this is a sample project, guys, that I've opened here. So as I said, these are the files we have. So okay, this is how basically it looks like. It's not too, I don't think it looks too complicated. As I said, these are your files. So for example, you have your interviews. So if I was to basically click on this, there you go. Okay, so that's your document. Okay, so this is how a transcribed interview looks like. Okay, so that means you have basically done an interview. Again, just touching on some basics, guys. When you do interviews, ideally you need to voice record the interview. I mean, you must voice record, and you need to do that because otherwise you might not be able to capture every single thing. Once you have voice recorded the interview, obviously with permission, you get prior permission, all that is being done at the very beginning. I hope you guys know that process. Once you've done your interview, you then turn that into a Word document, and that Word document is what is being then imported onto NVivo, and that is how it looks like on the software. So you can see clearly the two people speaking. So one is obviously the interviewer, and the other person is the interviewee, and whatever ideas they've captured, whatever they said, everything is here. Okay, so that's how your interviews will look like. And also, if you're doing, let's say, case studies, you can put your news articles. So that means PDFs could be also imported onto NVivo. So you can clearly see. So now, for example, if there's a newspaper article, what you would do is you would obviously download it from your website. You turn that into a PDF or save it into PDF. Again, same process, import it onto NVivo, and you have your files there. Okay, again, on social media, same thing. So again, now this is quite interesting. These are some tweets. I hope you can see here. So these are some Twitter processes that is available. And again, if there's literature that you want to also use to support some of the arguments, now this is very rarely you would use literature here, but again, you can use it. So I'm showing you the sample file here just to show you what are the different kinds of things that you'll be using. Okay. And again, if there's a survey things, you can put that in. Right. So again, very briefly, so these are the files, guys. These were the interviews that I did. Okay. And then if I was to come to one of the interviews, now I'll take this interview again. So Mahesh's interview. So as I said, these are nodes. Okay. The nodes are things that you have before you do a study. Okay. So as I said, you have some themes that you've identified from literature that you think are important. And then based on that, you have your files here, and then you start looking at places where they're talking about those files. So the example I took was leadership. So I thought leadership is important for organizations during crisis, because this was a study that was looking at crisis and how organizations can get over crisis. So if I think leadership is an important thing, I put it here as a node, and then I start looking at the literature and see where they're talking about it. And then when I highlight it, and I basically copy and select an existing code. So that's one thing you can do. That means you have something that you've identified at the very beginning, initially, before you even look at the interviews, and then you start looking at the interviews and then trying to see, okay, where it where they talk about it. There's another thing that you can do. The other thing that is another important thing that you can do that helps with theory building is that sometimes some of these themes, some of these nodes, you might have not identified from the literature. But when you read, when you look at the interview transcripts, you can clearly see that, okay, hold on a second, there is something new here. Okay. So now, for example, let's take an example here. Okay, for example, they're talking something here about your values don't change, your business ethics don't change, but how you respond to the challenge will change. Okay, so maybe this is something I find quite interesting. Okay, so I might think this is something to do with, okay, that means business ethics plays a role in terms of how, or let's say, business ethics plays a role in the way which organizations focus on change, or it's something to do with leadership, for example. That means I would think, or I can interpret this as, okay, your business ethics don't change. That means no matter what happens in the organization, okay, the ethics, the qualities of the organization don't change. And I might think this might be relevant to the leadership. Okay, it might be something coming under leadership. Okay, that means we have an overall topic called leadership here, you can see here, but under leadership, there's something called business ethics that is quite important. So what do I do here? So I basically highlight this and I click here, right click, and then I select code. Now here, we are not going to select an existing node here. That means ones we've already picked, but we are going to basically add a new one. Okay, so we are going to create a new one, and the new one, we can basically put it under a different location. So we go here, as we said this is coming under leadership. So we are basically going to click leadership, and we are going to say, okay, something to do with business ethics. It's a new category that we think is relevant. Yeah, simple as that. Okay, so what happened here? So leadership is what we call the parent node. Okay, and business ethics is the child node. Okay, so that is how we basically go about in our interview. So by the time we look at one transcript, we might, so any idea that comes to your head, you should put it here. Remember that. Okay, any kind of idea that you think is coming through, you should put it into this category. As I said, you read the text, you understand, okay, this talks about business ethics, put it there. Okay, don't only stick to the information, don't only stick to the information that you've gathered at the very beginning. Okay, start looking at new things which might be coming as you sort of start exploring the interviews, and put it into these categories. So then you will have quite a substantial amount of information. And once all your interviews are done, guys, here, once all your interviews are done, when you go into these nodes, okay, now when you go into your nodes, now this is the actual file I have worked on. So if you want to look at adaptation, you just click on it. When I click on it, all the studies that I've spoken, all the instances where they have spoken about adapting comes here. And even if I want to go further, okay, under adaptation, or let's say something easy, we look at flexibility, something everyone understands, flexibility of organizations. Now, these are all the instances where flexibility has been spoken. And when I click on it, it automatically goes to that place. You can clearly see that's where it's been spoken. Okay. And then on flexibility, if I want to really dive into further things, okay, under flexibility, I'm interested in understanding psychological flexibility. Basically, in your mind, are you able to adapt? And I click on it, and there are 5 places where they've spoken about it. So that's how basically you will be using. And I'll come to memos. So here, these are the memos that I've written, guys. Remember, I told you about how we make notes of different situations. So now this is an example I've written. Now, this is something I picked up during the interview. I've written something about, there was an idea with the employees that change is always not beneficial or positive. Hence, there was a lack of motivation to try something different, be innovative, and stick to routine tasks. So this is a note that I made to myself during the interview that I felt when the person was talking. Okay, now this was not something someone said. Remember that. Okay, and again, there's another thing. Okay, let's look at something else. Okay, there's nothing there. Okay, lack of finance impacting. Okay, availability of funds was something that was hindering many of the organization's capabilities. And one instance mentioned was the ability to innovate and be creative. There may also be possible links with the size of the firm for the reason. Okay, perfect. So here I was again looking at how organizations need to adapt to change. And I think I was speaking to a smaller company or a smaller manufacturer. And one of the biggest problems they said is, look here, we like change. We like new changes to come into the organization. Unfortunately, we don't have the financial capabilities, or we don't have the financial resources to obviously finance these kind of changes. So that's something I picked up. People sometimes will not tell you directly these things, but they will tell, okay, we want change, but it's very difficult. We are small. Okay, when somebody says that, you should be able to understand, okay, what are they saying? They're basically saying they're a small company. They don't have the financial resources to change. So that is something you can write during the interview. So you can use it for memos, for theory building things later on in the process. Yeah, so and I think so that is basically it, guys. And I think one of the most useful things that you can do with once you have okay, I don't know what is happening. Let me see. Okay, so once you have all the information, is that you can then start what we do, simple things like word frequency. You can run okay, let me try with the sample project. I don't know why it's not working here. Okay, let me see. I want to show this as the last point so that we are clear. 1 second. Analyze. I'm surprised we managed to run the session even to this extent without any hiccups so far. So hopefully this will not be a problem. Let me try my best again. So I'm just getting NVivo booted up again. Okay, we got our file opened. Let me see if this runs. Perfect. Okay, I think we are running it. Query. Okay, right. Right, guys. So as I said, now the last thing I want to show is, okay, now when you have an interview files, how do you basically get an idea of what this entire, okay, let's say we've done 30 interviews. We want to basically know what the text is talking about. So the easiest thing that you would do is you go on to query, you do what we call a word frequency. And here, for example, you can say, okay, I would put the minimum word length to 5. Let's say, okay, anything below 5, I don't want. And then basically I run the query. Okay. And then obviously you get this on Microsoft Word also, but the most important thing for me is this word cloud. So basically it helps us. Now, this is not an analysis, by the way. This is a basic idea of gathering, okay, what this entire, let's say 30 interviews, okay, what are the 30 interview files talking about? Okay, so for example, there's information about people. Now, this is not ideal because you have your own interview questions also, but you can get a basic feel for what this entire text is talking about. So there's talk about people, there's something about social, there's something relevant to let's say experience of people. I can see here there's some things relevant to, let's say, the organization, the business sector, enterprise, and so forth. So this is helping us to gather a basic idea of what this entire text is being done. Okay, so then what do we do is, okay, as I said, the most important thing out of this entire process for all of you is to work on these nodes, okay, and trying to identify from the text what are the new kind of coding terms, nodes that you can identify from the text. Once you have done this process, guys, what happens is then you have finished your job on NVivo. Then you go on to, let's say, whether it's a thematic analysis, and then slowly start to use these concepts and build your, whether it's the case study or the qualitative analysis, and take it forward from there. Guys, I hope you found this useful. So what I would advise for all of you is, again, including our beloved academics, is to start practicing this, okay? Because it is something, it's very difficult for me to explain, because obviously you will have your own files. I can see Mr. Kasum nodding, because you will have your own files, because you will have your own information. So the best way to do is you do a few interviews, you get that interview transcribed, or you have your own interviews that you've done, play with the software a bit and get a feel for it. And then once you sort of get the hang of it, you'll understand how useful this is to go forward. But again, I would welcome any questions that you have right now, and I'm more than happy to answer them.
Yes, Dr. Isuru, this sort of question coming. So, first of all, I would like to thank you on behalf of NSBM for conducting this session. Actually, I'm a person who reluctant to participate research sessions because most of the sessions we focus on theories, why research is important, what are the those kind of stuff. But this is a focus session on a particular software. So I encourage young researchers club to organize sessions like this, that we can directly apply this knowledge to our research, and it is really helpful for publication targets as well. So thank you very much. I think the Young Researchers Club will continue to work with you to enhance the research capabilities of our academics as well as academics.
Thank you, Mr. Kasun. No, I mean, I fully agree. I think on what you suggested, I think it's very important that we don't really, I mean, I should be saying this, but I'm not an advocate of going into the usual ways of explaining how to do research and what are the research onions and these things. It's important, yes, as undergraduates, it's important, but it's more about you really applying things. I think that's something, especially in this part of the world, people do. They actually have gone away from theory and the traditional ways. You really start applying, because that's why I even use the example of an actual case where we can really dive into the example of how would you using it. I mean, there's no point me explaining there are 10 different ways in which you can use NVivo, but if you're using only 2 ways practically, let's talk about the 2 ways that you're going to use it and show that. I think that's the way I think we should go forward. So thank you for that comment.
Any questions?
Any more questions?
Dr. Isuru, I'm Shami. So it was a very important discussion. So I'm actually doing qualitative research. So does it, I know it's a very fun question, but does NVivo facilitate transcribing option as of now in the current software? Does it?
Yes, good question. Yeah, so transcribing is available at the moment, but unfortunately, the problem is, as I said, it's something to do with our dialect as well. I mean, it's very similar to some other softwares as well. If you are speaking, obviously, the accent is the problem to pick up things. I mean, if that's not the case, yes, I think that will be easier. It's available, but most of the time, from my experience, as I said, the way people speak and the pace at which people speak will be the challenge for you to do. So even if you use the software, you might still be going through the end recording just to make sure everything was captured in the right way, unfortunately. So that's a bit of a challenge. But if you can really tell people to speak slowly, and if they speak clear English, I think improve as time goes. So that's how it is right now at this point in time.
Okay. So one more thing is just so in NVivo, does it facilitate mainly is it onto theoretic canvases, or can we facilitate other like grounded theories, like can we do a proper?
Yes, you can use it for anything. I mean, even grounded theory, you can use it for that. Yes, certainly.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Problem.
Hi, Dr. Isuru, this is Shani.
Hi, Shani.
Dr. Isuru, there's a small question where now in the very beginning of presentation, he said that we are saving the emotions. Will be observing the emotions in memos and we'll be saving it in memos. And when we are writing the qualitative research, how can we write these emotions and also the data that we collected or the themes that we collected from it? How can we write it in the research?
Yeah. Yeah, so basically what happens is, I think the emotions side of things, one side of it comes from existing theory. Now, for example, if it's something to do with, let's say, cultural sensitivity or something, you will have that coming from literature, some of these themes, I would say. And then what happens is through NVivo, as I showed you, you will be identifying some new nodes or new concepts related to those thoughts as we go along. So it's a combination of some of those initial themes that you had from literature, combining with the new themes that you had from NVivo, but that is not necessarily the actual analysis. So then you'll have to take that forward, okay, in terms of whether it's a thematic analysis, and then try to see whether those ideas could be further built as themes as we go along. I don't know whether that answers your question. So what happens is the thoughts are finally sort of put into a certain thematic approach, and you will have certain patterns emerging from those themes that you can then connect back to the original idea that you're bringing on. So I would say NVivo is more of a middle process, or a sort of a mid-level process that helps you to really go through with the analysis. So it helps you really capture the information, and then you are still left with the actual analysis part to be done with qualitative.
Right, thank you.
No problem.
Yeah, I think that's what Dr. Isuru from question. We would like to thank you on behalf of the Young Researchers Club for conducting this session today. It was really knowledgeable for us, and for the students especially, we gained a lot, I guess, in it, and we'll be using it for our future researches as well, and for our lecturers as well. They also engaged in this session. It was nice to see that. We cannot be more grateful for the session. We hope to continue with you in the future and do more researches with you, I guess, as students. And thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to invite you to give us some feedback on the administrators in charge.
Right. Good afternoon, Dr. Isuru, Mr. Hassan, and my lecturers and the members of the Young Researchers Club and the students. So first off, I normally do this, I have to remind Mrs. Lakshana. He is the one who initiated this entire research club. So I always remind him, and I have to thank him for initiating such. And then Ms. Basuri, who has engaged me and actively looking after us and also guiding us for continuing these sort of activities and always giving us advice. We do this, Shahani, do that, we can try this. So likewise, we have to remind her, even though she's not here. And I have to thank my dear Young Researchers Club, the members. I know there are few members. When we take this university, young researchers, these sort of activities, when we conduct these sort of activities, I know for a fact that people who are coming to these sessions are the people who already have this motivation or encouragement of doing such researches. So therefore, thank you very much for being here, and thank you very much for continually organizing this without supervision. I don't supervise sometimes, you guys. You do it because you want to do it. So this is the young researchers. I'm pretty sure that you are going to do amazing well in the future. And last but not least, I have to thank Dr. Isuru for coming into our session. Just a one phone call and he said, okay, we'll do it. So he is, whenever we post something socials, he's one of the regular persons who like and share these posts and encourage us to do so. So I have to thank you, sir. Thank you very much for this wonderful session. And thank you very much for sharing the license as well. Normally we don't get it, and it is a first. Not everybody would do such things, so we have to thank you.
My commission. Remember about my commission, by the way.
Thank you, sir. And yes, it is a wonderful session done, and all the best for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. And seriously, again, want to thank YRC, because I think making research fun, informal, and engaging is, I think, essential thing to do. I think that's one of the most difficult things to do, especially in Sri Lanka. But I think what you guys are doing is to make it informal and to make it more like a, like a club kind of thing, really helps everyone. So thank you very much for having me. And yes, go ahead. I hope everyone will try NVivo. And if there are any problems, you can always reach out to me on LinkedIn. Or where I am. I'm quite active on my LinkedIn work or any other things, but more than happy to welcome any comments, especially from the academics as well. So good luck, all of you, and have a great day. And I'll speak to you all soon. Thank you.